This module deals with some of the more technical things we'll cover in this class. This chapter discusses networks and telecommunications, and even though it's a little technical, it still covers some very important information. One of the first things we need to talk about is a network. A network is a group of computers and peripheral devices that are connected to each other to share data and transmit information back and forth. For example, two computers may be connected to each other to share files or send email, or they might be connected to another printer to share the same printer. The Internet actually is a very large computer network. Here you see an illustration of a network, and we have several computers that are connected to each other via hub. You can see that they all share an external hard drive, and they also share a common printer. Now, this is actually an example of a local area network, or a LAN, and a LAN exists in a limited area, for instance within the same building or perhaps the same campus, local area network. This illustration is also a peer-to-peer network, which means there is no one server that controls access to the network. Each workstation is essentially equal, and you will see peer-to-peer networks in homes and small businesses. This illustration shows an example of a wide area network. A wide area network is actually several networks that are connected together, but they don't exist at the same place. For example, if a college had an extension campus like LCSC does in Coeur d'Alene, the connections between the two, that would be considered a wide area network. There are several different ways that we connect computers to each other, and in a wired network, one of the most common ways is using twisted pair wire, and this illustration shows twisted pair wire, and it is just what the name implies. It's two wires that are twisted together, twisted pair, and we see this in a lot of local area networks, and also the old style telephone wiring uses twisted pair. Another communication wiring system you'll see is coax cable, and you should be fairly familiar with this if you have ever hooked up your television to cable or to satellite. And with coax cable you have a single insulated wire, and then you have shielding around it. Well, we have certainly progressed past twisted pair, and the best and top-of-the-line communications medium at this point is fiber optics, and this illustration shows an example of fiber optic cables, and you actually have thousands of thin glass filaments that transfer your information via light pulses, off and on pulses. Fiber optic is a little bit expensive, and you'll see it in large businesses, and even some new housing developments advertise fiber optic as a way to get buyers interested in buying into that new development. Remember, we defined the Internet as essentially one big large computer network, and if you're actually going to connect your computer or your network to the Internet, you'll probably be using some sort of a modem. And a modem actually stands for modulator demodulator, and don't worry too much about the technical aspects of this, but what a modem does is it converts signals from analog, which are the waves that you see on the left side of this picture. Voice and sound waves are analog, and it converts them to digital. Digital information is the information that a computer can understand. And it also goes the other way. So when you transmit something from your computer, the modem converts it to analog. And when you're getting information into your computer, the modem converts it from analog into digital. Connecting computers or networks to the Internet is very important because almost everything we do on computers uses the Internet. And this chart on this slide just gives you some different ways that you can connect to the Internet, and it's kind of a hierarchy of slow to fast. The slowest and most ancient, but it's still used a little bit, is dial-up. Dial-up uses a modem, and again, it's very, very slow, would not be very practical for almost anything that you would do on the Internet today. DSL is typically provided by your telephone companies, Quest or Frontier or whoever you have, and then you could have a cable modem, which would use a coax, which we described a couple slides previous. There's also satellite. If you're someplace where you can't get DSL or cable, then you might get satellite internet, and there's wireless where you might connect downtown. There might be a common provider for the entire town, and then of course the best would be fiber, and fiber is expensive as we mentioned, but it is very, very high tech and extremely fast. Connecting computers or networks to the internet is very important because almost everything we do on computers uses the internet. And this chart on this slide just gives you some different ways that you can connect to the internet, and it's kind of a hierarchy of slow to fast. The slowest and most ancient, but it's still used a little bit, is dial-up. Dial-up uses a modem, and again, it's very, very slow, would not be very practical for almost anything that you would do on the internet today. DSL is typically provided by your telephone companies, Quest or Frontier or whoever you have. And then you could have a cable modem, which would use a coax, which we described a couple slides previous. There's also satellite. If you're someplace where you can't get DSL or cable, then you might get satellite internet. And there's wireless, where you might connect downtown. There might be a common provider for the entire town. And then, of course, the best would be fiber. And fiber is expensive, as we mentioned, but it is very, very high-tech and extremely fast. Well, when we're talking about the internet, one item that's going to invariably come up in discussion is an IP address. And an IP address is a unique number that identifies each computer or device that's on the network, or in this case the internet. And you see in this slide an example of four sets of numbers that are separated by a period. Now, a static IP address would never change, and that would be hard-coded out onto the internet. A dynamic IP address would be something that you would see within a home or small business network. The modem would assign it an IP address, but that's only recognizable for that network. It wouldn't be recognizable on the internet. Well, if you had to remember an IP address for every place you wanted to go on the internet, it would make the internet very clunky and not very user-friendly at all. And so to make it more friendly with the www, or World Wide Web, you have something that is called a Uniform Resource Locator. And the Uniform Resource Locator, or URL, is a unique web address, but it actually uses a domain name. Now, the first thing you'll see is a protocol, such as HTTP or HTTPS or FTP, different protocols, then the domain name like www.lcsc.edu. And if you wanted to go into a specific folder, there would be a path, and you would use a / to get into that particular folder or path, and then finally the file name. And many times, as you see in this slide, the file name will end in an HTM, but it also could be a PDF file or a PHP file. I mentioned protocols a little bit, and the protocol that you will most often use on the web is HTTP or HTTPS. And the HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And hypertext is actually what makes the internet work. Hypertext is text that when you click on it, there's a link behind it, and when you click on it, it actually jumps, or hyperlinks, if you will, to the new location. I've already mentioned HTTPS as a protocol a couple of times, but that's the secure version of HTTP, and it actually encrypts the information so that the information that you transfer over the internet cannot be intercepted, or it could be intercepted but it wouldn't be able to be read. And anytime you're doing banking or financial information, or buying something using your credit card information, you want to ensure that the protocol you're using is HTTPS. As I mentioned, the internet has changed just about everything we do in business. And one area that's very, very exciting, especially for students that are doing group projects, are tools that allow you to collaborate online. This slide lists a few of the tools that are available to you. Many of these are free. Google Docs is an excellent way to collaborate. You can actually do real-time collaboration. You can all be editing your documents at the same time, even when you're all over the world in different places.